الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل أغير الله أتخذ وليا له السماوات والأرض وهو يطعم ولا يطعم قل إني أمرت أن أكون أول من أسلم ولا أكونن من المشركين قل إني أخاف إن عصيت ربي عذاب يوم عظيم من يصرف عنه يومئذ فقد رحمه وذلك الفوز المبين وإن يمسسك الله بضر فلا كاشف له إلا هو وإن يمسسك بخير فهو على كل شيء قدير وهو الخالق فوق عباده وهو الحكيم الخبير قل أي شيء أكبر شهادة قل الله شهيد بيني وبينكم أوحي إلي هذا القرآن لأنذركم به ومن بلغ أئنكم لتشهدون أن مع الله آلهة أشهد قل إنما هو إله واحد وإنني الذين آتيناهم الكتاب يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم الذين كفروا أنفسهم فهم لا يؤمنون فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا أو كذب بآياته إنه لا يفلح الظالمون ويوم نحشرهم جميعا ثم نقول للذين أشركوا ثم يقول للذين أشركوا أين شركاؤكم الذين كنتم تزعمون ثم لم تكن فتنتهم إلا أن قالوا والله ربنا ما كنا مشركين انظر كيف كذبوا على أنفسهم وضل عنهم ما كانوا يفترون ومنهم من يعبدك وجعلنا على قلوبهم أكنة أن يفقهوه وفي آذانهم وقرا وإن يروا كل آية لا يؤمنوا بها حتى إذا جاءوك يجادلونك يقول الذين كفروا إن هذا وهم ينهون عنه وينأون عنه وإن يهلكون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون ولو ترى إذ وقفوا على النار فقالوا يا ليتنا نرد ولا نكذب بآيات ربنا فقالوا يا ليتنا نرد ولا نكذب بآيات ربنا ونكون من المؤمنين الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بل بدا لهم ما كانوا يخفون من قبل ولو ردوا لعادوا لله وقالوا إن إلا حياتنا الدنيا وما نحن بمبعوثين ولو ترى إذ وقفوا على ربهم قال أليس هذا بالحق قالوا بلى وربنا قال فذوقوا العذاب بما كنتم تكفرون قد خسر الذين كذبوا بلقاء الله حتى إذا جاءتهم الساعة بغتة قالوا يا حسرتنا على ما فرطنا فيها وهم يحملون أوزارهم على ظهورهم ألا ساء ما يقولون وما الحياة الدنيا إلا لعب وله وللدار الآخرة خير للذين يتقون أفلا تعقلون قد نعلم إنه ليحزنك الذي يقولون إنهم يكذبونك ولقد كذبت رسل من قبلك فصبروا على ما كذبوا وأوذوا حتى أتاهم نصرنا ولا مبدل لكلمات الله ولقد جاءك من نبأ المرسلين وإن كان كبر عليك إخراجهم فإن استطعت أن تبتغي نفقا في الأرض أو في السماء فتأتيهم بآية ولو شاء الله لجمعهم على الهدى فلا تكونن من الجاهلين إنما يستجيب الذين يسمعون والموتى يبعثهم الله ثم إليه يرجعون الله أكبر سمع الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله سمع الله لمن حمده السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Inshallah, after the remaining prayers, we will continue with Friday night session. We're looking at evolution of Islamic law. In particular, we'll be looking at the Shafa'i madhab. Please join us in the madhab of the state. Hadith number 1228. Talha ibn Ubaidullah reported, at the sight of the new moon, the Prophet ﷺ used to supplicate, Allahumma ajlahu alayna bil amni wal iman wal salamati wal islam, Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allah, hilalu rushdin wa khayr. Translation of the meaning, O Allah, Let this moon appear on us with security and faith, with safety and Islam. O moon, your Rabb and mine is Allah. May this moon be bringing guidance and good. Narrated by Imam al-Tirmidhi. After citing the moon, one should recite the prayer which was recited by the Prophet ﷺ. The prayer cited in the text of this hadith is one of the prayers. So we learn how the Prophet ﷺ used to greet the new month, the lunar month. Remember, in Islam, we follow the lunar calendar, and it is the appearance of the new moon which signals the start of the new month. And so the Prophet, he would greet the new month or the new moon by making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring safety and peace and guidance and Islam and rushd, all that leads to guidance and khair, which is all that is good for the believer. So this is one of the lost sunnah. We should revive these du'as, we should revive these practices in our lives, teach them to our children, so that inshallah they will continue to practice it. So whenever you see the new moon, make a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the goodness of the Muslim, for the khair that that month will bring, for the safety and peace that it will bring for the people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with all the good of dunya and the good of akhirah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.
I don't know ICU, but normal.
Good. No, the Khalifa, yeah, I don't know. He's probably busy these days. He likes it when it's later. He doesn't like it when it's earlier.
No, there's no power all of a sudden.
Really? Try the bottom one sometimes. That bottom switch. It was working the other day.
There was power, then there was no power.
There's power.
Yeah, no, there's power in the whole time.
Okay, inshallah.
The official start time is 8 or 7:50?
7:50 is what I had sent, it's almost 8 o'clock. Yes, please, yes.
The power went in here and went out here.
Huh? Power went in here and went out. Alhamdulillah. Like one of the politicians, he did not agree with the government policy of making electricity, so his argument in the parliament was, if you take out all the electricity from the river in this point, then you are not leaving any electricity for the rest of the river at this point, because you have taken out all the electricity from the water, so now you have left nothing for us in the water. So, and people believe that kind of stuff, people like, yes, he's right. So that's what you said, power went from here and just waiting for the green signal from Brother Ahmed and then we'll start. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you for being here. I know the weather is not conducive for being outside. May Allah reward us all for our efforts to be here. In order to learn for His sake, His deen, and to develop a better understanding of things. We are back with another session on the series, Evolution of Islamic Law. And all the previous videos are on YouTube. For those of you who missed out any previous sessions, you can go and check them out there under the Islamic Center of East Lansing YouTube channel. You can find all the previous videos. What are we trying to do in this series? We're trying to understand how Islamic law developed over the centuries. How did these different madhabs come about? These schools of fiqh come about? How are they similar? How are they different? What circumstances forced them to customize their fiqh, different from other fiqh, which was developing in other regions due to different circumstances in those regions. We have broadly divided this evolution into different stages. We said the first stage was the stage of revelation. When the Quran was coming down, the Prophet ﷺ was alive. At this stage, the sources of Islamic law were only two, Quran and the Sunnah. Whenever somebody needed an explanation, they would go to the Prophet ﷺ, and then of course the Prophet would guide them based on revelation. The second phase is the phase of the Khulafa Rashidun, where no more revelation is coming down and new issues are coming up which were not there before in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's where the Khulafa Rashidun developed a third source of Islamic law, which is ijma, where the Sahaba would get together, they would make shura, and then they would develop consensus. And at the end, everyone would follow the fiqh or the madhab of the Khalifa. So in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, all Muslims were obliged to follow the fiqh of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu at the public level. Of course, in your own homes, you can have whatever you feel is correct, but when you're in the masjid, when you're out in the public, and if the Khalifa says this is what we're going to do, then that's what everyone has to do, unless of course he says something which is in contradiction to the Quran and the Sunnah. So that is the second stage, where now ijma or consensus of the Sahaba was added as a source of Islamic law. The next stage is the 100 years after this, which is the Banu Umayyah, the Umayyad Caliphate. And in this, many of the Sahaba spread around. They were not together to make ijma, because in order to make ijma, the Sahaba had to be together. Of course, now they are spread all over the Muslim world, and so ijma became harder. It became difficult to make shura or council, and so a fourth source of Islamic law was added at this stage, and this is called the individual opinion of the scholar or the individual opinion of the Sahabi, and this was done through qiyas. This was done through ijtihad, where each and every individual scholar living in whatever region they were, they used their own intellect based on Quran and Sunnah to come up with rulings for the time. So that was the third stage. And then the fourth stage was the Banu Abbas, especially the first 200 to 300 years of Banu Abbas. This is now where the madhabs come around. This is where now we get the schools of Islamic law, the Hanafi school, the Shafa'i school, the Maliki school, the Hanbali school. One thing that we said we don't realize is today we have 4 schools of thought, but in this period, the Abbasid era, there were literally hundreds of schools of thought. There were many, many schools all over the Muslim world where scholars were teaching their students, and they were developing their methodology on how to come up with rulings or fatwas on issues that were new to them. Most of those schools disappeared due to political reasons, or because they didn't have outstanding students to continue their work, the work of the scholars, due to state policies which favored certain madhabs over the other madhab. And eventually now what we have in the Muslim world, in the Sunni world, the 4 schools of thought. But there was a time, as I said, there were many, many, many other schools of thought that were being taught and practiced in the Muslim world. So we've already looked at 2 of those big madhabs. We've already looked at the Hanafi madhab, and we've also looked at the Maliki madhab. So if you go in order for the 4 scholars, who is the first one? Imam Abu Hanifa. And very close to his time is Imam Malik. Imam Abu Hanifa is in Iraq. So he is the one, the great scholar of Iraq. Whereas Imam Malik is in Medina, in the Hijaz area, and he is the one who is known to be the great faqih of the Hijaz area, especially in Medina. So we've already looked at them. Today we are going into the third one, which is the Shafi'i school of thought. So let's start with the founder, Imam Shafi'i. His date of birth that we have is 769. 769. So you can think of the era. The Prophet ﷺ passed away in 632. 632. So this is close to 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ. So 769, and his death date as we have it is 820. 820 Common Era. This is the Abbasid era once again. The full name of the scholar after whom this school of legal thought has been named was Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. That's his name. His name is Muhammad ibn Idris, and he was known as Imam al-Shafi'i. He was born in the town of Gaza on the Mediterranean coast of what was then known as Sham in the year 796, but traveled to Medina in his youth to study fiqh and hadith under Imam Malik. In fact, his mother first took him to Mecca. So his childhood years were spent in Mecca, learning from the scholars of Mecca, where he memorized the Quran at a very young age, and he started sitting in circles of knowledge. Then his mother takes him to Medina, because he's one of the outstanding young talents of Mecca, and the greatest scholar of the time in Medina was Imam Malik. So the family thought the best thing for him to become a student of Imam Malik. But Imam Malik would not take any student. He had a condition. You guys know what his condition was to take a new student, Imam Malik? Yes, his condition was that the new student, before he even joins, has to memorize his book, Muwatta, which was the book, one of the first books in Islam, which was a collection of hadiths, but also the collection of the statements of the Sahaba and so on. So you have to memorize his book in order to join his study circle. So that's what Imam Shafa'i did. He succeeded in memorizing the whole of Imam Malik's book, Al-Muwatta, and recited it to him from memory, word perfect. So Imam Malik was highly impressed by this young person, and he took him in under his wings as a student. Imam Shafi'i remained under Imam Malik until the latter died in 801. So Imam Malik dies around 801, and Imam Shafi'i is his student all these years. And we said this earlier, the tradition of that time was, as long as your teacher is living, you are the student. So it's not like you can graduate during your teacher's lifetime. He is the teacher and he will teach, and you are the student. So in a gathering, for example, if Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik are sitting together, who's the one who's going to give the dars? Imam Malik, because he is the senior and he's the teacher. No matter how outstanding Imam Shafi'i becomes, this was the understanding at the time, that as long as the teacher is there, then we are students and will remain his students till his death. So after the death of Imam Malik, he went to Yemen and he learned from the scholars of Yemen. So Imam Shafi'i is very different from the four. The other three were very localized. They didn't travel too much out of their area. Imam Abu Hanifa in Iraq, he stayed mostly in Iraq. Imam Malik in the Hijaz area. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal again back in Iraq. They didn't travel too much. But Imam Shafi'i is one of those who used to travel a lot. And he traveled throughout his life. And that is why his fiqh is more a combination of the fiqh of the different schools of thought. The other schools of thought, they are fixed in their madhab. But Imam Shafi'i's madhab was very flexible, because as soon as he would learn from a new set of scholars, he would update his fiqh. So he would change his fiqh, or he would change his fatwas and rulings on different issues. So now after Medina, where does he go? What's the next one? After Medina, where does he go? Yemen. And he learns from the scholars of Yemen. He remained there until he was accused of being a Shia. So there was a rumor spread about Imam Shafi'i, because he's in Yemen and Yemen had Shia scholars at that time. So there was a rumor spread about him that he had converted to becoming a Shia. And so he was summoned to the court of the Khalifa. The Khalifa at that time was Harun al-Rashid. So he was summoned to the court of Harun al-Rashid, and the charges against him, he was arrested basically and brought from Yemen to Iraq, and the charges were that he had converted to Shia and his teachings were all corrupted and so on. But he was able to prove in court that that is not true, that he had not converted to being a Shia, and his aqidah, his teachings were still the mainstream Sunni teaching. So that was something that he had to go through, one of the accusations against him, because he was in Yemen. So Harun al-Rashid, he summoned him, but he was able to prove that he was only studying with some of the scholars in Yemen rather than learning about Shia fiqh or trying to convert to it and so on. Imam Shafi'i then remained in Iraq and studied for a while under Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was the famous student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So now what is his third area where now he learns? First was Medina under Imam Malik. Second was Yemen under the scholars of Yemen. And now the third one is Iraq. And he's learning the Hanafi fiqh. From whom? Not Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa had died by this time. But from one of his main students, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, became his teacher. So you see how he's moving around and learning the different fiqh of his time. Later he traveled to Egypt in order to study under Imam al-Layth. We talked about the Laythi madhab before. Laythi madhab was one of the big madhabs of that time in Egypt. And Imam al-Layth was an outstanding scholar. In fact, Imam Shafi'i, he has a statement in which he said, according to him, Imam al-Layth was a greater faqih than Imam Malik, because he had studied under in Imam Malik, and he had studied under the students of Imam al-Layth. He had studied the fiqh of both. According to Imam al-Shafi'i, who was the greater scholar? Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'd was a greater scholar than Imam Malik. But as we know it, his madhab disappeared. He didn't have the students, the political backing to continue his madhab, and so today we only have references to his madhab and his books and his work. So he then went to Egypt and learned from the students of Imam al-Layth, because Imam al-Layth also had passed away by that time. From what I know, there's no direct books that we have. We have references to his books and references to his statements and so on. So some recorded statements in the books of others, like Imam al-Shafi'i and so on, but not direct. We do not have any direct authorship from him as far as I know. Allahu Alam. So Imam al-Shafi'i then remained in Egypt until his death in the year 820 Common Era. During the rule of the Caliph al-Ma'mun, he passed away. So where did he pass away? In Egypt, while he was studying and teaching in Egypt under the students of Imam al-Layth. So let's very quickly track the 4 main locations where he traveled throughout his life to learn. He starts born in Palestine. Yeah, Gaza. Yeah, he's born over there. Yeah. But then where does his studies really begin? Fiqh studies. Medina under Imam Malik, number 1. Then Yemen, the scholars of Yemen. Then Iraq under the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. He learned the Hanafi madhab. And finally, Egypt, the Laythi madhab, he learned there. So you can see he's very well-rounded. He is like studying all over the major centers of learning and scholarship in the Muslim world at that time. Let's talk about his madhab now. Imam al-Shafi'i combined the fiqh of Hijaz, the Maliki thought, with that of Iraq, the Hanafi thought, and created a new madhab which he dictated to his students in the form of a book called Al-Hujjah, the evidence. So now this is the first phase of Imam al-Shafi'i's scholarship, where what does he do? He combines the fiqh of Imam Malik, he learned under him in Medina, and the fiqh of Iraq, Imam Abu Hanifa. He combines them into one, and he makes a new madhab, okay, which is the Shafi'i madhab, and he records it, or this madhab is recorded in his book called Al-Hujjah, which is the evidence. So that's the first stage of his scholarship in his madhab. This dictation took place in Iraq in the year 810, and a number of his students memorized his book and narrated it to others. That was the way of promotion of the madhab at those times. In those times, the students of the scholar would memorize the book of the scholar and then would teach it to others. That's how the madhab was promoted. This book and period of his scholarship are usually referred to as Al-Madhab Al-Qadim, the old school of thought, to differentiate it from the second period to his scholarship which occurred after he reached Egypt. That's why when you, for example, do your research in the different madhabs and you want to know what the ruling of the different madhabs is on this issue, you will find oftentimes they say Imam al-Shafi'i has 2 opinions on this issue. One is the earlier opinion, which is the combination of Maliki and Hanafi madhab, and the other is the latter opinion, which is now an update after he learns the Laythi madhab. Okay? So you'll find with the same thing you'll find with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. You'll find Imam Ahmad has this opinion and that opinion, because a lot of times there was an earlier opinion which got updated in the later years of the scholar. Any questions on that? The first period, Madhab al-Qadim. In Egypt, he absorbed the fiqh of Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'd and dictated al-Madhab al-Jadid, the new school of thought, to his students in the form of another book which he named al-Umm, the essence. Because of his exposure to a completely new set of hadiths and legal reasoning in al-Madhab al-Jadid, he reversed many of the legal positions which he had held while in Iraq. Imam al-Shafi'i holds the distinction of being the first Imam to systematize the fundamental principles of fiqh, which he recorded in his book called Ar-Risala. So you will find that a lot of the rulings he had in the Al-Hujjah, which was his first book of fiqh, they were reversed in his second book of fiqh, Al-Umm, okay? Which shows on one end his flexibility, He's not rigid in his opinions. Yes, I gave that fatwa 10 years ago, now I'm going to stick to that fatwa all my life. No. As soon as new hadith, new evidences are established, these imams were able to change their ruling. They did not have ego problems. They were not stubborn in their opinions, which is now what distinguishes them from later scholars that came. In these same madhabs, the later scholars, they said, no, Hanafi, we are Hanafis, we're only going to follow the Hanafi madhab and we're only going to take these evidence. I am a Shafa'i, I'm only going to follow the Shafa'i madhab and I'm only use these evidence. This was not the attitude of the founders of these madhabs. They were flexible. They were looking for the truth. As soon as new evidences came, they had no problems updating themselves. They had no problems revising themselves. And this was part of the downfall of the Muslim Ummah. This is what the concept of taqleed is. Taqleed is where you blindly follow a scholar. We're talking about students of knowledge here. We're not talking about the common folk. Common folk, of course, we don't have knowledge. We have to follow a scholar, right? Yeah, if you have the knowledge, then yes, you go and find the evidence. But if you don't have the knowledge, like most common people don't, then you follow a scholar you trust and you go with that. We're talking about within those schools, the people who were students of knowledge, the people who were scholars themselves, they were rigid. In the later century, they became rigid. There was no research. Always remember the thing which differentiates nations which are successful with nations which are failing. One of those distinctions is research. A nation which keeps up research will keep on growing. If you stop research, you're going to decline. Whether it is dunya, in dunya affairs, engineering or social sciences. Look at all the nations which spend millions of dollars on research. They are the top nations in the world in those areas. Whereas a lot of Muslim countries, we have no research. We don't have funds. We don't have universities. We don't have the labs, the research facilities. Okay? So we are behind in those areas. But the same thing applies in fiqh. You have to keep doing. New scholars of the era need to keep doing research and need to keep updating things so that we are at par with the times and circumstances we are in. Okay? If you're going to use a 600-700-year-old fatwa, which was given in a different country, in a different context, and you're going to apply it to your time and your circumstance, it's going to cause chaos. It's going to cause destruction, problems. Because that fatwa is no longer applicable maybe in your situation. The circumstances have changed, the culture has changed, and so on. So research was the key element of these great scholars of the early times, and once that research stopped, we saw what happened. Also, as we said, Imam Shafa'i is credited to be the first scholar who came up with usulul fiqh, which are the principles on which fiqh should be developed. He basically made a system, and he wrote it in his book Ar-Risala, which is still available. You can read this book. It's a masterpiece in this area. And then other scholars followed him after him. So he's the first one to come up with a system of making fiqh based on the principles of fiqh. Any questions on his life or his madhab, how it changed and developed? Are we good? Good. Okay, now let's go to what were the sources that were used by him. How is he different from the others? So of course, the first source of Islamic law that all scholars use, all madhabs use, is the Quran, because that is the authoritative source, Allah's words. Imam Shafa'i did not differ from the previously mentioned Imams in their uncompromising stand in relation to the primacy of the Quran among the sources of Islamic law. He heavily relied on it as those before him, adding only the new insights which he gained from a deep study of its meaning. So the only update that one could do with the Quran is what? Interpretation. You're not going to change the Quran. There's no new Quran. What is the Quran is always going to remain the Quran, right? But then the insights, the reflections, the interpretations, the applications, okay, the Arabic of the Quran, and so on. That's where a scholar can do research and maybe have something to add to what was missing in the previous scholarship before. Number two, what comes after the Quran as the second source of Islamic law? The Sunnah, the way of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam Shafi'i laid down only one condition for the acceptance of hadith, namely that the hadith be authentic. he rejected all other conditions set by Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. So what was the condition of Imam Abu Hanifa to accept a hadith? What was special in the Hanafi madhab, which was not there in the others? He said, this has to be there for me to accept hadith. Mashhur. He said that the hadith has to be famous, well known. If you bring him a hadith which is not known in his area, he's not going to take it. What was his reasoning behind it? Why did he put this condition? It has to be famous, it has to be mashhur. Because Iraq, where he was living, was the center of fabrication of hadith, lying about the Prophet. There was so much lying going on in Iraq. People used to make up hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ all the time. So he said, no, not only should the hadith be authentic, yes, it has to be authentic, of course. Its chain has to be correct and everything. But it also has to be well known to scholars of hadith, to scholars of Islam, and then only will he accept. So he put this extra kind of layer of security because of his circumstances, because he's living in an area where hadith is made up, where there's a lot of lie. So you see, that's his madhab. So what's the disadvantage of this? The advantage is you're only going to take real good hadith. You're not going to take any hadith, right? It has to be authentic, it has to be famous. But what's the disadvantage of this approach? You're going to miss out on many authentic hadiths which might not be famous in your area, right? So now his madhab is going to be little different because his rulings are based on this condition, which the other scholars did not put this condition. Imam Malik did not have this condition in Medina. He didn't say it has to be authentic and famous. He said authentic, right? Because in his area in Hijaz, Islam was pretty pure. There was no fabrication of hadith going on in Makkah and Medina and the Taif area where Imam Malik was. So he didn't need to put this extra layer of security. But what was his special thing which Imam Malik said, I'm also include this in the Sunnah of the Prophet, which the other said, no, that's not right. What was his unique thing that he introduced in Sunnah? And he said, this is also Sunnah. Yeah, the practice of the people of Medina, the culture of Medina. Imam Malik, he said the culture of the people, if people of Medina, all of them do something in one way, then he said that they must have learned it from their parents. And their parents are the Sahaba. So where did the Sahaba learn it from? They must have learned it from the Prophet ﷺ. So he said anything which is widely practiced in Medina, it's a custom of Medina, it's the action of the people of Medina, he considered that to be the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas other scholars said, no. It doesn't mean if the people of Medina are doing something that the Prophet must have taught it to them. They might have been doing it before Islam. They might have acquired it outside Islam as a practice. Okay, that might have been their culture. That doesn't mean that it is from the Prophet ﷺ. So that's why he used to have heavy debates through letters with Imam al-Layth. We talked about Imam al-Layth in Egypt. He used to write to Imam Malik and they used to disagree and debate with each other in letters. So that was Imam Malik. But Imam al-Shafi'i, he said no, both of those conditions are not required. It doesn't have to be mashhur, like Imam Abu Hanifa said, and it doesn't have to be the practice of the people of Medina. As long as the hadith itself is authentic, I'm going to take it. Okay? So that is where he was different from the others. He was also noted for his great contributions to the science of hadith criticism. So remember, during the time of the great Imams, the science of hadith was still developing. It was not finalized. It was finalized by people like Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, the great Imams of hadith, who came little later, right? But in his time, it was still developing. So he contributed to that, how to understand a hadith is authentic. What are the conditions of authenticity? How to verify a hadith and so on. He was a part of the scholarship in that regard. Any questions on Imam Abu Hanifa's second source of Islamic law, the Sunnah, how he understood Sunnah different to the others? Are we good? All right. The third one, Ijma. Although Imam al-Shafi'i had serious doubts about the possibility of Ijma in a number of cases, he conceded that in a few cases where it was known to have occurred, it should be regarded as the third most important source of Islamic law. So he's saying now in his time, Ijma was difficult, because the scholarship is all spread out. For all the scholars to get together and to reach consensus was hard. But he said in the previous generation, like the time of the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, there were issues where the Sahaba agreed on something. So then he said that should be evidence. So the third source of Islamic law, ijma. In our times, this is something which is by most scholars accepted. Ijma is accepted in our times as a source of Islamic law. So if a new issue occurs in our time, and majority of Islamic scholars, they have a conference, they get together and they reach a consensus, then most of the scholars would say we have to follow that because it is a source of Islamic law after the Quran and the Sunnah. But some scholars, they say it is no longer possible to have ijma because of the splits in the ummah and the different kinds of scholars out there and their levels of knowledge and so on. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But in the past, some people living in like India, some people in Egypt,
Yeah.
how did they do it? Something they did it.
Yeah.
But how they say like this is not, they went to travel.
Yeah. Well, some of them did, but a lot of that ijma used to occur during Hajj time, where scholars from all over the world would come for Hajj and they would annually meet with each other and discuss issues. So, and then they would go back to their lands. But it was not possible for all scholars to travel for Hajj every year, right? So you're not like getting all of them, but a lot of them would gather and use that as an opportunity to discuss issues and so on. But you're right, in those times, for example, we know scholars of Spain, Islamic scholars in Spain, did not know the scholars of Khurasan. Like they did not know Imam al-Tirmidhi. If you were to be in Spain and you went to a scholar and you say, do you know Imam al-Tirmidhi from Tirmidh? They say, no, I've never heard this name. Similarly, the scholars of the Central Asia would not know the scholars of Morocco and Spain, who were on the westernmost tip of the Muslim empire. So it was difficult for them to get together, unlike our times, like you said, where we can have conferences and traveling is easy. Online, of course, resources are there. So that was the third source of Islamic law, ijma. Any questions? Yes. Sahaba, yes.
That ijma is not seen as ijma to be taken as
Yeah, of course. Yes, yes, of course. You mean the Sahaba's ijma? Did anyone challenge Sahaba's ijma? Yeah. Yeah. From what I know, that was not challenged by the mainstream. Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. Yes. First three generations. Yeah. So that was the authentic ijma which all scholars agreed to. The problem was the later ijma. That's where they had difference. Is it possible for later ijma to take place, and should we take it as a source of Islamic law? Many scholars said yes, others said no. Like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he was of the opinion, he said ijma is no longer possible after the time of the Sahaba. So we only take whatever the Sahaba agreed upon. After that time, every scholar is on their own. So he was not a big fan of ijma, later on. So there were scholars who were against that. But as far as the ijma of the early generations, it was agreed upon that is a very strong source of Islamic law. Cannot be challenged. The fourth one that Imam Shafa'i used was individual opinions of Sahaba. Yes, athar which are individual. They don't point to any ijma. So the third one is ijma of the Sahaba, right? Where they all agree. But what if there was an issue where the Sahaba did not agree? One Sahabi held one opinion, another Sahabi held another opinion. So that's where now Imam Shafi'i would use he would pick one of those opinions that he agreed with over his own opinion or opinion of other scholars at his time. He still preferred to go with the Sahabi's opinion, even though it's an individual opinion. It's not an ijma on that issue, but he preferred that he goes with that opinion over his own opinions or the opinion of the scholars of his time. Credence was given by Imam Shafi'i to the individual opinions of the Sahaba on condition that they were not at variance with each other. If there were conflicting opinions among the Sahaba on a legal point, he, like Imam Abu Hanifa, would choose whichever opinion was the closest to the source and leave the rest. Of course, when there's conflicting opinions, you have to choose one opinion. So he would choose the one which he thought was most authentic, was most correct. But he did consider that over the opinions of scholars and his own opinion. That's number 4, individual opinion of the Sahaba. Number 5, he used qiyas. Qiyas was, in Imam's opinion, a valid method for deducing further laws from the previous sources. However, he placed it last in order of importance, considering his personal opinions inferior to proofs based on the opinions of the companions. So once again, there is an order here. It's not like he's going to use qiyas before ijma of the Sahaba, no. Or he's going to use ijma of the Sahaba before the Quran, no. This is an order here. Quran number 1, Sunnah number 2, ijma of the Sahaba number 3, individual opinion of the Sahaba number 4, and then qiyas. So what are we talking about when we say qiyas? What do we mean by qiyas? Deduction, reasoning, ijtihad. The scholar, he looks at the evidences that are there in Quran and Sunnah. He establishes some kind of a link to the new situation, and then he, comes up with a reasoning or a law or a verdict of halal or haram based on that. So the most common example that is cited for qiyas is analogical reasoning, where you compare two sets of situations. One is your new situation, the other is the situation from the time of the Prophet. And then you try to see if they are similar in certain ways. And if they are similar, you're able to establish they are similar, then their ruling is the same. The example I've given before is drugs, right? The Quran and Sunnah does not directly deal with drugs. Are drugs allowed or not allowed? We're talking about drug abuse here, basically, not the medications, right? But the Quran does mention alcohol is forbidden. So qiyas would be, or the deductive reasoning would be, because Allah has forbidden alcohol, why did He forbid it? Because it takes your ability to think away. It diminishes your health. And do the drugs do the same thing? They can take your ability to think. They can, take away your health. So the ruling on both has to be the same. So that would be an example of qiyas or ijtihad of an individual scholar. So that's number 5. Number 6 is interesting. It's called istishab or linking. Okay, so this is now unique to Imam Shafa'i. It is not used by others, even though it's similar to something they use. Both the principle of istihsan used by Imam Abu Hanifa and istislah used by Imam Malik were rejected by Imam Shafa'i and considered a form of bid'ah, innovation. So in those two schools of thought, they had their own understanding of issues which are new. But if we go by qiyas, then that would cause public difficulty. Okay, public difficulty. So what was qiyas? Once again, comparing the two situations, right? And saying whatever the ruling of the old situation is should be the ruling of the new situation. So let's say a scholar does qiyas and says, because this was haram, so this new situation, this is also haram, forbidden. But once he says this is haram, it causes huge public difficulty. This ruling is so difficult on the people that is causing distress to the people. That's when Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, they came up with these terminologies of istislah and istihsan, where they say public benefit would now overrule the qiyas. Even though they look similar, the situations and the ruling should be the same, but we're not going to apply that ruling because it's going to cause difficulty. Okay, so they came up with this. Imam Shafi'i, he said this is bid'ah. He said no, this is wrong. You cannot do that. But he had his own way of dealing with it. However, in dealing with similar issues, Imam Shafi'i was obliged to use a principle similar to istihsan and istislah, which he called istishab. So they all came up with their own terms, but at the end of the day, they're basically using similar technique and similar process. What is this istishab? Literally means seeing a link. But legally it refers to the process of deducing fiqh laws by linking a later set of circumstances with an earlier set. So sounds a little bit like the qiyas. Sounds a little bit like qiyas. It is based on the assumption that the fiqh laws applicable to certain conditions remain valid so long as it is not certain that these conditions have altered. So an example of this would be a missing person. A person is missing. You don't know if this person is alive or this person is dead, right? And that can have consequences in fiqh, right? For example, a husband goes missing. It's been 5 years. The husband has not returned home. Nobody knows he's living or dead. So Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, what would their ruling be in public benefit? Yeah, so there are opinions, but their general ruling is that after a limit, you have to assume the person is dead. Because the wife cannot keep waiting, decades upon decades for this person, right? She can remarry, she needs support or whatever, the children need support. So their ruling was based on public benefit, they would have a limit of after this time, you would have to consider him dead. Yeah. But there's differences. Even within the scholars, there's differences of, because it's not Quran or Sunnah, it's just based on your own reasoning. Imam Shafi'i has the opposite ruling. He says, no, you have to assume he's living because you have no evidence, the circumstances which existed before are still there. You have no way of knowing that he is dead, so you assume he is living. So you see, his ruling would be different in those cases. His ruling would be the wife has to wait indefinitely until there is evidence that the husband is dead. So even though they're ruling similar, they're using similar concepts, but they're coming up with different rulings, okay? Because of the way they are understanding this. So these are the 6 sources of Islamic law in the Shafi'i madhab. So let's recount them. What are the 6 again? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, individual opinion of the Sahabi, and then Qiyas, and then Istishab, okay, which is the linking with circumstances that have not changed. Now let's go to the main students of the Shafi'i madhab. The most important of Imam Shafi'i's students who continued to follow his school of thought were Al-Muzani, Al-Rabi, and Yusuf ibn Yahya. Al-Muzani's full name was Ismail ibn Yahya al-Muzani. He was the constant companion of Imam Shafi'i throughout his stay in Egypt. Al-Muzani was noted for writing a book which comprehensively gathered the fiqh of Imam Shafi'i. Later condensed under the Mukhtasar al-Muzani, it became the most widely read fiqh book of the Shafi'i madhab. As I said, the success of a madhab depended also on the students. How active were the students, how brilliant were the students, how eager were the students to keep the madhab going. Sometimes the main scholar was outstanding, like we said Imam al-Layth was an outstanding scholar, but his students were not that eager to spread his madhab or write about it or collect his statements and record them. But Imam Shafi'i, he was blessed with 3 outstanding students who made his madhab grow after his death. One of them, Al-Muzani. Another one, Al-Rabi, who was noted as the main narrator of Imam Shafi'i's book He wrote it down during Imam Shafi'i's lifetime along with his book Al-Risala. So he was the main scribe of Imam Shafi'i who collected his books, the last 2 books especially. Yusuf ibn Yahya, another student, succeeded Imam Shafi'i as the main teacher of the madhab. He is the one who replaced Imam Shafi'i as the scholar of the madhab. He was imprisoned and tortured to death in Baghdad because he rejected the officially sanctioned Mu'tazilite philosophy on the creation of the Quran. So that was a big fitna that happened during the Abbasid era when the Khulafa became influenced by the Mu'tazila philosophy. Who were the Mu'tazila? They were the first rationalists within the Muslim Ummah. Today we have many of them in the world. We have plenty of them, yeah. They have their own YouTube channels, they have large followings and so on. But what was their idea? They were heavily influenced by the Greeks and the Romans and their philosophy. And their idea was that if something doesn't make sense logically, rationally, then it cannot be from Allah. So on this basis, they rejected, for example, many of the names of Allah, attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They said, it doesn't make sense that Allah would have these attributes. So they rejected them. Some of them even went on to reject certain portions of the Quran, who said, these verses do not make sense, so they cannot be from the Quran and so on. So they were rationalists who believed intellect over revelation. Intellect comes first and revelation comes next. Whereas the mainstream opinion has always been what? Wahi comes first and then intellect is subservient to it. Okay? Whether we understand all the wahi or not, no, that does not mean the wahi is wrong. It means our intellect is not there yet, or our intellect does not have the capacity to understand certain issues And then when we say intellect, whose intellect? That's another question. You might feel it is very rational, I might feel it is irrational, because human intellects are different. We differ with each other. We have different ideas and understandings about things, right? So it was a complicated era. And one of the things that they said was that the Quran is the created word of Allah, meaning it is not part of Allah's attributes. The mainstream opinion has always been the Quran is the Kalamullah, speech of Allah, and the speech of Allah is one of His attributes. So just like Allah, the Kalam is also uncreated. The Kalam of Allah is uncreated, just like His speech is uncreated. So you can, eternal, yeah, it is uncreated, it is eternal, it has always been there, it will always be there. Okay, so the Mu'tazila said, no, that doesn't make sense. They said Quran came into existence at a point in time. So it is a word that Allah created, and then the word was sent down to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for this fitna, a lot of scholars were punished. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal most famously was imprisoned, and people used to come to him and say, why don't you just say what they want you to say? Because they're torturing you every day, you're imprisoned, you're a great scholar. Just tell them what they want to listen to, hear, and then you are out. Like many scholars had done. Many scholars had said, what the leadership wanted them to say. No, nobody wanted to go through torture, right? So Imam Ahmad, he said, look at this city of Baghdad and its surroundings, and the people of this city listen to my opinion. If I said something like that, people would believe me. Meaning he understood his responsibility as a scholar, that his word has meaning to the people of the city. And so he stood firm and he was oppressed. So one of those people who were killed, in fact, for this was the student of Imam Shafa'i, Yusuf ibn Yahya. He was killed and tortured for this. Then there were other scholars like Imam al-Bukhari who used a different technique to save themselves, because when the soldiers would come and they would present a Quran to them and say, is this the created word of Allah or uncreated word of Allah, right? Because they're testing all the scholars to see who would agree. And he would just kind of, put his finger on the Mus'haf, on the Quran, and he would say, this is created. This is created. And then later on, when people would ask him, what did you mean when you said that? He said, I was talking about my finger. This is created, right? So he bypassed this oppression in a different way. But the point of the matter is that a lot of scholars had to go through torture and difficulty in order to keep this aqidah going. And alhamdulillah, after some time, the Mu'tazilite influence was taken away from the caliphate, and the traditional Islam was revived. Yes. I mean, yes. He kept it going, but it is not like direct like torture that killed him. But a lot of people believe that it was due to the long-term torture that it impacted his health, and eventually what we know is that he died a natural death. He went out, yes. Eventually, because the caliphate changed. Once the caliphate changed, the new caliphate did not agree with Mu'tazilites, and they resumed the scholarship of the, yes. But they say that because of the torture he had endured all these years, that led to his death. Allahu Alam. Allahu Alam. Any other questions? Yeah, Mu'tazila are there today. They don't call themselves Mu'tazila anymore. The name, the tag is different. Like we said, they call themselves the enlightened ones, the liberal ones, the intellectuals. They have different names in art, but their philosophy is the same as that of Mu'tazila. They keep the intellect over the revelation. You'll find many Muslims, for example, who don't believe in certain aqidah in Islam. They say, oh, this doesn't make... There are Muslims I met who don't believe in miracles. They don't believe in miracles. So what they do is, all the miracles reported in the Quran, they would interpret them in different ways, in scientific ways. Yeah, so we had in the subcontinent Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Muhammad Abdu, so these are the rationalists of our time, and now we have many of them in the States and UK as well, who are teaching this philosophy. So they are there. We need to be aware of what they're doing, and we need to prepare to counter them, because a lot of youth fall into their trap because a lot of youth are not prepared. Their knowledge is not there. A lot of youth are influenced by science and rationalism and so on. So we have to be careful, and we have to safeguard our aqidah on these issues. Of course, this is not the main issue of our times now. The Quran being created or uncreated is not the issue of our time. But here we have our own issues, like I said, miracles, evolution. Evolution is an area where the rationalists will use that and say, the story of Adam and Hawa is symbolic. Just like many Christians today say, that it's a symbolic story. It's not like there was a real Adam or a real Hawa. No, that cannot be possible because of evolution and so on. So in our times, we have our own set of challenges with these rationalists. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. Any other questions? So that's it from the Shafa'i madhab. I hope that you have a better understanding of the madhab and how it developed and its main scholar and the main students. Inshallah, next time we'll talk about the Hanbali madhab in detail. If there's no more questions, then we'll stop here. Let me just quickly check if there's online anything. I don't see anything. We'll stop here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan. Next Friday, inshallah, we'll go back to the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha. Next Friday, we'll go back to tafsir session, inshallah. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.